I thought I'd start about fasting today. Talk a little bit about fasting. I fast every week. And people often ask me about fasting, why I fast and what it does for me and all the rest of it. And obviously we talk about fasting with food, but really the most important thing is fasting, spiritual fasting, or psychological fasting, spiritual fasting. But it starts with our food fasting. And again, if you're going to fast, you need to look into it properly. You need to consult experts on how to do that. I would just really want to tell you that what I experience and what I get from it. My biggest lesson really came from reading the life of Gandhi, reading how Gandhi became a powerful conduit for energy by creating himself, by moulding himself into a beautiful vessel where a tabernacle or a container was built within him, that where he could hold spiritual essence, and it made him very powerful in the world, or it made him a very powerful conduit. This is a guy that was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6, probably 6 stone, very small guy, but he had 300 million followers, and he managed to bring the British Empire to its knees non-violently. He freed India non-violently. And this was, he says the key to it all for him was fasting, and he started with controlling his food. And his belief was, and my belief is, that when we control the food, the senses fall into line. When we control the senses or the sensual body, we control the self. When we control the self, we control the world. So it's basically saying we get control of what's out there when we get control of what's in here. So fasting starts with what we eat and what we drink. That's the beginning. And it isn't rocket science, to be honest. It's mostly just about eating light and avoiding the normal rubbish that you see every single day, that any dietitian would tell you. Any dietitian worth his credentials will tell you, about eating vegetables, about eating fruit, about not eating meat or eating very light if you're going to eat meat, like white fish and white meat, about accessing food that is close to the sun. So we're obviously, the plants and the vegetables and the fruits convert the sun energy into energy that we can consume. And if we can consume energy that is very close to the sun, we get very pure energy. The further away it comes, the further away the energy is from the sun, the more dense the energy is going to be. So if we animals that eat vegetables, then it's one step removed from direct sun energy. If we animals that eat animals, it's one step further away again. So we're having to go through lots of dense material before we get pure essence. And we're also having to consume karma. If we're eating animals that eat animals, we're consuming karma, we're consuming fear, all the obvious stuff, all the obvious biological stuff. So the key initially is to eat things that are closest to the sun, like your fruits, like your vegetation, your vegetables, and just generally light portions. We think we need lots of energy. We don't need a massive amount. We don't need as much as we think. So I just tend to eat light. So what most people would consider a meal, I'll probably have half of that. Me and Sharon tend to share meals. So, and it doesn't mean we don't have takeaways. I still like pizza. I like a mushroom curry. I like dark chocolate. I'm not a monk. I don't live in a cave and eat nothing at all. I just eat light. And as you can see by my body frame, I used to be about 16 stone and now I'm somewhere in the 12. So I'm much, much lighter, but I'm lighter in myself. So this is what we would call expansion through contraction. So we contract the physical body through control of palate, but we also contract the control of the senses. The senses are always craving for food, for excess, for what you might call pornography. And the Buddhists would consider pornography to be anything that is outside of homeostasis. Homeostasis is your natural balance. Basically, if you have what you need, that's your natural balance. If you have more than you need, if you are consuming more than you need, that would be classed as excess or pornography. So when we control the senses through the food, we control the self. When we control the self, we control the world. because obviously our world begins and ends with us. The centre is us, and the circumference, there is no circumference, there's no limitation, but the centre is always going to be where we are. So we start off by what we eat and what we drink, and that's like having clean water, avoiding excessive sugar, eating our vegetables, eating fruit, nuts, seeds, all of the normal, really, really healthy stuff, and eating very, very light, not big meals, not engorging the stomach and creating an expectation of more, just eating what we need to eat. And it's an interesting thing when you start to eat light. It's the opposite to what people think. I'm finding the spiritual laws are opposite to the material laws. When we eat light, there's a feeling that we're giving things up. But when we go into fasting and start eating light, we get more flavour from less. There is more flavour from less. So you might think you need to have a lot in order to enjoy, but actually the enjoyment is enhanced when you have less. The flavour is enhanced when you have less. So Gandhi didn't eat a lot of food, but they always say that he loved his food and he relished his food and he enjoyed his food and he looked forward to his food, but he didn't eat very much. So it's a spiritual trick. When you're stuck in a negative diet, you feel as though you've got to give things up. But actually, when you're outside of that and you're in a healthy diet, you realise that you've not given anything up. You've escaped something. You've escaped excess. You've escaped pornography. You've also escaped the control of the sensual body. And we also think that we won't enjoy things very much if we eat less of it. But actually, you enjoy things more because you savour it. There's more flavour, and the body obviously craves healthy food, so the body's much more sated. So we've got to look after the body and we've got to feed the horses, but we don't need very much. We don't need as much as we think. I can remember when I first gave up red meat many, many years ago. I remember my ego kicking off, and I was going on holiday, and in my head I was thinking, what's the point of going on holiday if I can't have a steak? What's the point? There was no point in going on holiday, and that told me a lot about where my mind was. It told me a lot about how childish my sensual body was, how childish my false ego was. If I can't have a steak, there's no point in going on holiday. If I can't have a beer, there's no point in going away. So I was very controlled by my palate. So when I let go of it, I just found other things to enjoy, even more things. And ultimately I gave up meat altogether. I wanted my fuel to be as fine as possible. This is a Ferrari. It's more than a Ferrari. It's an intricate spaceship, a beautifully intricate spaceship, and it needs the best fuel. It needs fuel directly from the sun, and it needs fuel from plants that are very close to the sun. It needs the very, very best fuel. If I've got a Formula 1 car, I'm not going to put rubbish fuel in it and rubbish oil in it. You're going to have the best oil, the best fuel. So we need a higher level of fuel if we're going to work, if we're going to work on a spiritual level. And it's obviously a very powerful challenge. Most people can't even conceptually understand that palate's important. But what we eat and what we drink is vital, because when we take in food, food is information. Food becomes flesh, obviously. And what we take in is what we are. And what we put out into the world is going to be a representation of what we're taking into our body. So eating light is the key. That's the very big thing. I always remember thinking as well, when I was younger, when I was aspiring and trying to achieve things, how would I expect to be able to work in the magical realms if I can't even control my own physical body? If I can't control the mundane realms, how am I supposed to do, work with esoteric knowledge if I can't even work with exoteric knowledge, like the normal knowledge that we know? How can I work with secret knowledge if I can't work with knowledge that everybody knows? How can I be a great vehicle for good if I can't control or don't understand the vehicle I'm in? So of course the first thing is, and it's not just, it's palate, but it's not just what we eat and drink. It isn't just about what we're eating, it's about what we're feeding. So the whole idea of fasting, first of all, fasting with our food and eating light and getting control of our palate, is that we are creating an environment in our body which is pure and clean. And to do that, I have to get rid of the things that keep wanting more. I have to get rid of the shadows in me that want excess, that want to eat and drink and consume, that want the pornographies of life. Those things keep me really grounded and really out of sync and out of connection with the higher realms. So it's not so much what you're eating that's the issue, it's what you're feeding. What is it that you're feeding? Well, if you want to know what it is you're feeding, stop feeding it. Start eating light. Start practicing getting rid of the beer and the alcohol. Try it just as an experiment. Try not eating meat. Just try it as an experiment. Create an environment in yourself that is hostile to your shadows. Create an environment that your shadows can't live in. So the moment you start eating healthy, all of your old shadows will rise up and say, where's our food? Where's our excess? Where's our red meat? I want to dip my chips in the blood of the steak. There's one of my biggest realizations why I gave up meat was when I was eating a steak and I was dipping my chip into the blood that was coming out of the steak, and I just thought, I cannot escape the fact that I'm eating an animal, and this doesn't feel right to me. So the moment you start to fast, you will automatically have opposition from within your own body. That opposition is what you need to convert. We need to clean that all out. So we're not like 10 different personalities. We're one solid, absolute personality, or one solid, absolute, authentic self. So palette is one of the best ways to locate who you're not. When these voices rise up and they say, oh, they want more, and they crave, and they're crying out for excess, and you feel this urgent need to eat more or consume more, you're able to automatically see who you're not. When you can see who you're not, it enables you to eventually find your way to who you actually are. So it's not what you eat, it's what you feed. We stop feeding the shadows, we make our vessel inhospitable for shadows, and eventually we just become a clean, golden, aligned, authentic self. So that's the first thing with the food, and that's the reason I started to get my palate right, was because I knew that if I couldn't control my sensual body, I would have no control of anything else, because my sensual body was running amok, with my anger, with my greed, with my overeating, with my overconsumption in sex, with this need to have more, this need to accumulate, this need to be seen, to be successful. When I stopped feeding all of those things, I was able to identify them. The moment you stop feeding them, they rise up and you can see them. You can draw the shadows out just by taking away their sustenance. They will rise up, you will see them clearly. Then you can go through a process of observing them and dissolving them and converting them. A great book to read on this is Hunting the Shadow, that I wrote, and a great book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now is a very good technique for this. So that's the first thing. We recognise that what we eat and what we drink is pivotal. This is when we start to really work on the inner game and on the inner life. The next thing we do is we start to recognise that what we read, what we listen to, who we speak to, our environment, what we listen to on the radio, what we watch at the cinema, we start to recognise that all of this information coming in through the senses, even what we touch, even who we lie next to in bed in the morning, when we start to realise that all of this information coming in is also food. So we start to intellectually fast. We start to fast intellectually. We start to restrict the amount of pornography that's coming into our mind in the form of information. What we hear on the news, what we read in the papers, mostly fear-based, is information. If we take that information in and we identify with it and we process it, it becomes flesh. Information is food. Information becomes flesh. So if we want clean food, then we stop taking the information from the porn mongers. We stop taking the information from the tabloids, from the news on the television, from our mates around the table, from the normal kind of front of store book that you might buy. We start taking information from purer places. We start taking information maybe from spiritual texts or motivational texts or philosophical texts. We start searching for better information. So that's when we start to intellectually fast, when we stop taking in all the normal gossip and all the normal rubbish that we hear, every single day. We are intellectually fasting. Then we psychologically fast. And we psychologically fast by no longer feeding shadows that rise up. When shadows rise up of anger or rage or guilt or all of these kind of different things, or righteous indignation. There's lots of righteous indignation around at the moment because of the things that are going on in the world. Lots of people are very angry. So we start to recognise that, if we want to fast psychologically, then when these old scripts rise up, my old scripts were lower working class kid, not good enough, got a chip on my shoulder, us and them, not for the likes of me, all that kind of stuff. When these old psychological chips start to rise up, these feelings of being unworthy, these feelings of not being enough, these beliefs that there is a limitation in the world, these beliefs that we can't achieve, these beliefs that that we just the belief in the just the belief in, the word will come to me in a minute, I'll come back to it, but just this belief that there is a hierarchy in the world, just this belief in the class system, that's what I was looking for. Just the belief that there's a class system. The class system is an idea, it's a perception, and it's based in the material world, but it's just an idea, it's just a perception. So we start to starve ourselves for that. We stop believing that. I don't believe in a class system. I don't believe I'm working class or middle class or upper class. I just believe that I am a human class. Well, I'm a hybrid. I'm part human, part spirit, somewhere in between the two, and trying to ascend all the time. So I start to fast. When those beliefs rise up, I no longer acknowledge them. I no longer accept them. I no longer identify with them. I no longer engage them. So I start to fast. I don't consume those beliefs. So all we're doing is regurgitating old energy, old beliefs, and then dining on them once again. So I don't believe in all those things, so I stop feeding myself with all of those old psychological beliefs. And then of course spiritually, we spiritually fast. All of this stuff is really spiritual fasting, but I look at the vices and the virtues. I start to feed off virtues. I mean, eventually there'll be no vice, there'll be no virtue, there'll be none of this. Eventually there will just be you living and being in the world. None of this will make any difference. This is just kind of an invented hierarchy or a grading system where we go, like when we do the martial arts, we go yellow belt, green belt, purple belt, brown belt, and they're very important, those grades. But then when you get to 8th dan, you don't care about those grades anymore because they mean nothing to you. They were a ladder that got you somewhere, but at a certain point you are a spontaneous being, a spontaneous martial artist. You live spontaneously. You have freedom because you live spontaneously. So all of this stuff will be important as you're climbing, but later on it will have no importance. There will be no hierarchy and there will be no sense of fasting. There will just be you living and being in the world. But for now, the way I've approached it is to feed myself on virtue, on charity, on kindness, on generosity, and to starve myself of vice. So any of the greed, the anger, the rage, the jealousy, the wrath, all of these things. If you look at the 7 deadly sins and the 7 virtues, we feed on the one and we starve the other. So that's spiritual fasting. And when we start to work in this way, we become a clean vessel. We automatically align ourselves and connect to our high self or to a high realm. And then we're working on a completely different energy form. So people always seem to think that fasting is peripheral, but it's really just saying what we're doing is we're learning to control our sensual body. We're learning to control our physical body. We're learning to control our mind body. We're learning to control and understand our egoic body. We're learning to connect to our soul body. And we have a hierarchy. So we have the soul, and then we have the ego, and then we have the mind, and then we have the physical and sensual body. And each one is under the command of the one above. So there is a definite hierarchy, and we are under the command of a higher force, our inner tutor or our inner guru, or our intuition. Later on there will be no hierarchy, there will just be an absolute where we just spontaneously live in the world, but that would be called enlightenment, and that's what people would aim for. So fasting is important for all of these reasons, and people think that's spiritual, personal development, spiritual development. They think it's a soft option. It's actually the most difficult thing you'll ever do. It is the most difficult thing you'll ever do. I can count on one hand the amount of people I know who can master palate, or who even understand what palate means. So it is a great challenge, but it's a great starting point. So we're not just fasting physically, we're fasting psychologically, we're fasting physiologically, we're fasting sociologically. If we fast sociologically, we just restrict the amount, we restrict the quality of people we knock around with. We change our environment. We don't stand in hallways talking murder and gossip with people, because that would be the wrong kind of food to take in. So sociologically we fast, and then of course the spiritual fasting is when we start to become virtue.